Well, good morning, everyone. Apologies for my slight lateness. Had another one of those dreaded Teams conference calls that we all spend half our life on these days by the sound of things, and slightly overran. So welcome back, everyone. Stephen Daish is my name for those people that are new to the hearing, and I'm the chair of this hearings panel. And Commissioner McMahon, David McMahon on my right, is assisting me with this task. As I said yesterday, many of us, most of us have been here for a couple of days, so we get to know each other quite well, but there are some new faces in the room. So just around the room, I'd just like everyone to introduce themselves that are new to the hearing, just one by one, and then we'll also go to those online and get the same introduction. So starting at the front here. Okay. Any other new people here?
Okay.
Yep.
Liam Welhom.
Of course. Liam, we saw you on the screen yesterday. Yeah, it's sort of it's a different dynamic when you're in the room. Yes. Great to see you, Kath. Yes.
So Glenn Cotley, training and transportation for Welhom as well.
Glenn, thank you. Junior. Okay. At the back of the room, we've got people that were here. Yes, that's right. Look, I think that's everyone. And online, we've got Matthew, I think.
Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, everyone. I'm Matt Hickman. I'm the Environmental Policy Manager at Greater Wellington.
Okay, great, Matt. And I'll just turn my phone off because that's a good reminder. Look, just a couple of things before we get to Greater Wellington's submission. There are a couple of matters just to go through. Just to remind everyone that the hearing is recorded on Teams, which is sort of a neat new innovation. We don't have to have transcripts anymore for these sorts of write too many copious notes. So that's so as long as everyone's comfortable with this, with that, that's something to note. And just to confirm that David and I, we have delegations from Marsden District to hear and make a recommendation on this private plan change. So that's our role. We've been around the traps a fair bit, so and it's been a very interesting and very well conducted hearing so far. So we're on the last day now. There were a few matters that we discussed yesterday as being sort of actions for everyone, and I thought I'd just go through and reconfirm those, that I've got everything and everyone's clear before we start. So I'll start at the top, and if I've missed anything, please let me know. So Mark Georgeson, you were going to prepare for us a table with your 4 scenarios with the level of service band, some sort of table like that. So that was for you. Megan, you were going to prepare for us some sort of chronology of the urban growth history for the district, leading up to the draft district plan. And we know that the proposed district plan is now going to be out in August, and that will either continue that process or whatever happens. So that's the understanding, and you'll be able to present that to us when you report back. Okay. We asked the planners, so Mitch, Megan and Kath, to think about the Section 32 appropriateness tests around 2 scenarios. One was effectively the controlled activity proposal as per we've got from Welhom, which came to us. There was an update, which I think everyone's got, with some new green tracking into it. as opposed to the, I think, David, you said discretionary or RDA or not.
Yes,
actually
I grouped the two together intentionally because they share some similar characteristics in terms of notification and no necessary presumptions.
Okay.
The key difference obviously is restricted discretionary. The matters of discretion are restricted, whereas with fully discretionary, everything's on the table. So
Yes.
and whether one is more effective or efficient than the other is for the planners to say.
Okay. And that was with some form of structure plan built into the discretionary
I hadn't
aspect.
contemplated that, but
Okay.
that's a possibility.
Wouldn't mind just having a discussion about that with the planners now. And it's probably something that's more efficient to do post hearing and not rushed on the hoof. So just thinking aloud, I think we'll, I'll get to confirm that with David, but our thoughts are there might be a conferencing process with the planners with those scenarios. So let's think about that. And if we can get, and maybe during the day, if the three planners could get together and work out what the scenario, the 32 approaches are, whether there's 2 or 3, a controlled as proposed, an RDA, and then a discretionary, and then see how a structure plan, which includes perhaps some details around the intersection upgrading as a part of a structure plan, how that might look. And if you could get together and perhaps through Megan, when she reports back, we could have that presented back to us, and then you could go away and conference where you agree, where you've got different opinions, you could set that out in a joint witness statement back to us. Does that sound a reasonable approach? Mitch, you're looking like yeah. I saw you at the hotel last night doing some homework on this already. So
I've got a head start.
Yes.
But we can put back and recess.
Okay. Okay. Look, that's great, and it's good to get that on the table. The last thing I had noted down was for the lawyers really thinking about our, I suppose it is our direction now from the court through that Judge Kirkpatrick sort of decision about efficient consenting processes, and you should not, we should be thinking about decision making for the next process to be as efficient and effective as possible. So I think it was Whakatane District Forest and Bird, reasonably recent case. So sounds like you probably all looked at that, and we'll hear from you on that. And the last thing, I suppose, was there anything else from yesterday that I've missed?
One minor point Wednesday was Mr. Heath is just going to provide a short note just clarifying the source of information that were amalgamated together to form that plan attached to his evidence of the various alternative sites.
Okay. All right. I'll add that in as a note. Daniel, I'm expecting closing submissions from you.
Yes.
As the proposer, and we should probably just work that out now. I think it's probably better for you to take some time next week to put that together and put that in writing for us, unless you want to do it on the hoof this afternoon.
Certainly, given that the there's homework for some of the other parties,
yes,
it makes sense for it to follow that. And
okay.
Perhaps, if we just confirm at the end of today the timing of that, just to make sure that it follows, whether it's a week after that is provided, yes, something like that, just to provide comfort on that. I think it would be good if I can provide some brief oral comments at the end of the day, but yes, certainly intend to supplement that with some written material to assist you.
Okay. Well, look, if the parties could get together through today and come back to us at the end of the hearing with a timetable proposal that you've worked out, and we can confirm that at the end of the hearing.
The section 32 table, we're to
Yes,
do it
that,
together,
that together,
but not today.
not today.
Right.
And then after that is produced, we'll give some more time to Daniel to produce his closing submissions for us. And then we'll close the hearing after that. But it's better if you work out what's possible rather than us trying to impose something together.
The one further request that you made yesterday, that may well be being covered by the council today, was just as far as their application and interpretation of the subdivision.
Oh, yes,
contribution rules.
yes. Is that on your radar, Rachel? Okay. Application.
In relation to that, you also asked about our legal opinion on the access rule. So my submission was that.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks, Liam. All right, well, let's get underway with Greater Wellington.
Watch the work that's been done today by Marsden District Council. And we particularly support the planning evidence submitted by Waka Kotahi. We are in support of the report recommendation that the plan change should be declined. This statement, I'll just caveat now, is based on information available before the hearing started. It hasn't been updated on hearing procedures over the last 2 days, which we haven't been present at. Having seen the Section 42A report and the evidence put forward, Greater Wellington do not support the private plan change going ahead at this stage. We don't consider that the proposed plan change is wholly consistent with direction from the operative and proposed change to the regional policy statement. It's our view that the planning decision to approve this plan change would not contribute to a well-functioning urban environment, which the National Policy Statement for Urban Development requires. It also wouldn't contribute as well as it could to the vitality and vibrancy of Masterton Town Centre. I'll just briefly cover our key concerns. Firstly, transport. Greater Wellington are not in support of greenfield development going ahead, where it's clear that the primary option will remain private and non-active transport modes. This is at odds with both regional and national policy direction. The private plan change request does not clearly and explicitly make provision for access to multimodal transport options, and the transport connections that are proposed clearly raise concerns regarding traffic safety, roading infrastructure capacity, and the accessibility of active transport modes. As outlined in our submission on this plan change, extending the road layout of the existing Cashmere Oaks subdivision is extending the cul-de-sac rather than providing a safe, permeable and accessible transport network. Due to the proposed transport connectivity of the development, future residents are likely to remain dependent on private vehicles and inactive transport modes. The reporting officer has identified the relevant regional policy direction, which directs provision for multimodal transport networks, which includes both the operative regional policy statement and proposed RPS change 1, which was notified in August 2022. Getting my years confused. I will particularly point to policy 1 of the NPSUD, which does apply to Masterton as a tier 3 urban environment, as we all know. And it includes in the definition of a well-functioning urban environment that they have good accessibility for all people between housing, jobs, community services, natural spaces, and open spaces, including by the way of public or active transport. And also that they support reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and are resilient to the effects of climate change. Secondly, the timing and the sequencing with infrastructure planning and the combined district plan review. The private plan change is occurring just ahead of a full review of the Wairarapa combined district plan. And as we know, a proposed district plan is due in mid-year. The combined district plan review is likely to lead to more stringent provisions on subdivision infrastructure and criteria for urban expansion. This review is also an opportunity to have regard to new direction given in proposed change 1 to the RPS and consider other options for meeting the demand for housing, which includes intensification within the existing urban areas and making better use of already identified greenfield areas. Masterton and the other Wairarapa towns currently still have significant potential for infill development, which could be enabled in appropriate locations to meet housing demand. Housing located with good multimodal access to services and amenities will more directly maintain and enhance the vibrancy and vitality of Masterton Town Centre, which is required by the operative regional policy statement. Sequenced, coordinated and funded planning for growth, with all necessary infrastructure to support the development secured, should be standard practice for greenfield development. That is, if the site is officially identified for future urban development, is deemed appropriate for urban expansion, and is necessary to meet demand. However, if a site faces constraints such as those identified in this private plan change, particularly with regard to transport connectivity and infrastructure, and a sequenced approach has not been taken, the bar should be high for permitting such developments to go ahead. We agree with Ms. Saint-Amand that managing serious infrastructure issues should not be pushed onto the resource consent stage. This direction is clear in the operative regional policy statement, particularly Objective 22, Policy 31, Policy 55, 57, 58, and Objective 6 of the NPSUD. The requested planning evidence by Mr. Lewandowski points out that the district plan review is an appropriate opportunity to align with intensification direction from proposed RPS change 1 and the NPSUD. However, that in the interim, the plan change will reflect the height and density provisions in the operative plan. In our view, this point again highlights the missed opportunity that the timing of this private plan change, if permitted, would represent. Undertaking a private plan change of such nature and scale out of sequence with the district plan review is out of step with an integrated response to housing demand and policy direction in Masterton. Finally, I'll just briefly touch on highly productive land. I acknowledge that there's been significant information put before the panel regarding the productive capability of the site and the application of subclause 3.6 of the NPS for highly productive land. We have not reviewed this information in detail. However, we wish to highlight that the significant development potential that is expected to be enabled by the proposed Welhom combined district plan when it's notified. We seek for the panel to consider this when reviewing information on alternative options to meet housing demand. We also seek that the panel, when it makes a decision on the application of the NPS HPL subclause 3.6, ensures that the intent of both the NPS highly selective land and operative RPS policy 56 to protect the productive capability of the rural area are achieved. In summary, given the proximity of the date for notification of the Wairarapa combined district plan, we don't consider that the plan change represents the strategic approach that is necessary to implementing the NPSUD, the NPS highly productive land, and the RPS. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that statement. Look, I missed your name at the start and I didn't write it down. So Mika. Okay.
How do you spell that?
ZOLLNER.
It's a familiar name, I think. Yes, some relation there, both in the banking and the planning areas. So, Mika, are you a planner? What's okay? You're a policy advisor. Okay. So is that why you're not presenting evidence under the code? You're really just giving us the general support for the submission made by the regional council. Okay, it's important to know that, because when we have experts, like we're asking experts to do different matters, we want to make sure that's. Look, I'll leave. I'll ask David to start with any questions, and I'll follow up. That's okay, David?
Happy to do that. Thanks, Ms. Solner, and welcome to the hearing. Have worked with your father before, so declaration of interest there. It's a shame that you weren't present or even online for the first 2 days, because there's been a lot of discussion regarding the two primary issues that you've raised. For example, on the highly productive land issue, we've heard from 2 soil experts, and also heard economic evidence from Mr. Heath, and collectively they've addressed the interim test under subclause 3.6 and quite a bit of detail.
Yeah.
That's to the extent that we probably have a reasonable basis to make a decision on that. It puts me in a difficult position to ask you the questions on that, also because you're not giving evidence, and you're not drawing on any alternative evidence to contest those positions.
Reviewed it.
Yes.
I
Yes. I guess if I have got a question on the highly productive land, it's regarding the end of your second to last paragraph, where you asked the panel, we're making a decision to ensure that the intent of both the MPS and the policy 56 are achieved. My question to you is there any misalignment between policy 56 and the MPS HPL that you're aware of?
6 in its operative form is quite high level. It kind of just,
Yeah.
It's a consideration policy that applies to private land changes. So it just says the productive capability of the rural area should be considered.
Yeah.
As the maintenance.
Yes,
of
I'm familiar with the distinction between sort of plan making and consideration policies.
Yeah.
In the plan and policy statement.
Yeah.
In that sense, would you agree that the MPS HPL provides more nuanced basis for more nuanced consideration?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it necessarily replaces that direction that exists in the operative UPS, which does apply to all plans.
Yes.
So I think they are complementary.
Yes, okay, that's okay. I'll just record that. So if the decision, if the panel feels that plan change is giving effect to the MPS or is not giving effect to the MPS, then it stands to reason then it's probably not consistent or is consistent with policy 56. Is that a fair comparison? Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
I mean, what you're suggesting to us is that 56 is at a broad level, and the provisions of clause 3.6 of the MPS take that broad level into a more specific arena.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I guess what I was saying in that is just that there is a possibility that significant housing demand could be enabled by the district on that being this.
Okay.
Of that one.
Did you want to raise anything more?
Oh, look,
Yeah.
Mika, it was just probably just for information purposes, you've followed the HPL evidence, the fact that we organised a process where Mr. Milner did some sort of a late mission down to look at the site and did some evidence for us over the weekend, and we heard from him yesterday, and Mr. Allen, and just their combined opinion was this particular piece of land is severely constrained, just because of the nature of the way the soil is organised. It's got a major drainage issue and is only suitable for productive, like just farming, sheep and cattle type of thing. So their advice to us is that it's fatally limited for any productive use in its current form. So that's the expert evidence we have in front of us. And because tier 3 councils have this additional way out, I suppose, to think about those things, that evidence in association with evidence from Mr. Heath, who looked at a lot of issues with that. We've got the expert evidence. So it's just really bringing up to speed. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the the interim definition of what highly productive land is just says LUC class 1, 2, 3, not identified future development. So it doesn't necessarily consider the geographically cohesive aspect of it. So I guess in that sense, it needs to meet one of those exemptions from 3.6.
Yes, and there's 3 elements of that which we've sort of worked through, and we'll need to work through on a decision. But the other interesting thing in this hearing is we're all new to the NPS HPL. There's not certainly no case law. We're one of the first hearings to consider it around the country. We know there's been a significant case in Pukekohe area that had a hearing on this in October last year, and they still haven't made a decision whether they're still scratching their head on this issue. I'm not sure what the decision makers are doing there. So this is an area of policy that we're all sort of learning, and it's great to get your sort of thinking and advice in terms of the policy sense as well, because we'll need to bring that together. But the other observation we made was Tier 3 councils seem to have there is an easier pathway there's an extra pathway that they can take advantage of in the interim, which Tier 1 and 2 councils can't. It's pretty much an avoid policy in the interim stage. So that was interesting. We've talked about that with council. So that's all on that one, David. So I'll hand over to the other matters.
Yes, just before we leave the highly productive land, can I just, in terms of your last sentence on your second page, where you say that you don't consider that plan change represents the strategic approach necessary to implement, and you list the NPSUD, the NPS HPL, and the RPS. Based on the discussion that we've just had, do you still maintain that position in relation to the NPS HPL? Is that Greater Wellington's position still, or is that your position? I'm not asking you about the UD or the RPS.
Bits of national policy direction together does require a strategic rather than an ad hoc approach. That's my view. And I think there's a real opportunity when marrying up the NPSUD direction, my NPS is confused, NPSUD direction with the NPS highly productive land direction, that it does point toward emphasis on infill and intensification. It's just another kind of reason to reconsider whether a greenfield site is necessary for demand and the most appropriate solution to meet that demand.
Yes,
that's my view.
Yes, and with the answer to that largely all around the evidence and the considerations in relation to clause 3.6.
In this instance, I guess so. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess I'll just also comment that the way that the RPS fits into that is that it has quite clear direction on a compact regional form that's been there since 2013, making use of existing infrastructure.
Yes. Going back to, thank you for that. Going back to your first page, and particularly the item 1 about transport, and you lead off by saying that the Greater Wellington doesn't support greenfield development going ahead when the primary option will remain private and non-active transport modes and is offered with the different directions. And I understand what you're saying there. It occurred to me, though, that in a sense, greenfield development at this location has already commenced with the Cashmere Oaks subdivision some 4 or 5 years ago. And Mr. Dace and I have driven around the site at least 2 times now, and pretty well established subdivision. It's got high levels of amenity, and I guess the question I've got for you is, in colloquial terms, hasn't the horse already bolted in this arena?
I mean, have you walked around that subdivision?
Parts of it, yes.
Yeah. I guess in this instance, what's proposed is one major cul-de-sac. It's not a connected road network that provides access to anyone but the people in that cul-de-sac, right, to anywhere else. So I guess I'm not opposed to the greenfield going ahead, but providing a more accessible road or transport network that provides for a greater range of transport options is that direction is quite clear, both regionally and nationally.
Yes. So is that a qualified response from yourself in respect to how greenfield development should occur?
That's my interpretation of the regional and national policy direction.
Yes.
Matt, do you want to add to that?
One element of, we shouldn't necessarily look backwards for examples of modern good practice. So we should be looking at development now through the lens of the updated national direction, whether it's HPL, UD, FM. There's a whole suite of national direction that has changed expectations of what urban development should be and where it should be. So it's also taking into account that we shouldn't use an example from 5 years ago to look for future development and locking in development that will be there for 20, 30, 40 plus years.
Okay, thank you. Masona, what's your understanding of the magnitude of this development compared to the development that exists currently in terms of spatial terms or numbers of units, number of dwellings, number of retirement villas?
In terms of what's currently built?
What's currently consented versus what's currently proposed?
Almost none, I would say. I am familiar with what is proposed through the what was the draft district plan. What in whatever form will become the proposed district plan in terms of future development, but not in terms of what's currently.
Yes, I don't have the figures in front of me, but there's stage 1 of the development is completed, and stage 2 is under construction at the moment. Is someone able to help you with the total number?
Cashmere Oaks overall 162, 61.
Yes, and the under the private plan change, there's a couple of scenarios. One involves a full residential, which was thinking around 250 units.
Yeah.
240. Yeah, and then what we're calling a mixed use one, which is a mixture of the retirement village, and I think around 99, 100 residential units. So it's sort of like a doubling of what's there currently. Does that change your view in any way in terms of the answer you gave earlier?
No. Yeah, no, I was aware of the size.
Mr. Lewandowski has, moving now on to more of the strategic documents, particularly the combined review and the Master Urban Growth Study, which is known as MUGS.
Yeah.
Mr. Lewandowski has said that the Wellington Regional Growth Framework has largely been superseded by the draft district plan. Do you have any comment on that?
You mean the Master Urban Growth Framework strategy has been superseded by the strategy? Well, they both have no statutory weight at the moment.
No, I think he felt that the Wellington Regional Growth Framework. Yes.
Has been superseded.
Yes, in terms of direction.
By the draft district plan.
And I guess by association MUGS, which the district plan, he says, gives some implementation to.
Right, but the district plan still has no statutory weight because it's draft. And the Wellington. Yeah, I mean, don't have a specific comment on the regional growth framework. The draft district plan doesn't currently have any weight yet.
What's the when was the Wellington Regional Growth Framework produced?
Wellington Regional Growth, 2021. Okay, is that right, Matt?
I believe so, Mika, yes.
Thank you. guess my final question is that you say that you acknowledge that the private plan change is occurring ahead of the full review of the mastered in or combined Wairarapa district plan, which we've heard is due in August this year. And really it's a request, and I think this is consistent with the evidence of Ms. St. Armand, that really decisions on this private plan change should be delayed until then, or a decision should be to decline the plan change and consider the matter again. Is that my understanding? Is that
Yeah.
correct understanding of your position?
Yeah, and one of the reasons for that is the scale of change in this district plan review is quite immense. So it's because it's a full review, this significant new policy direction and just generally requirements on subdivision that do not that it will look very different to the operative district plan. So why proceed now under an old framework when a more strategic approach to providing for growth and responding to the NPSUD, which Masterton needs to do,
Sure.
could be done. It's a way more coordinated, sequenced way to provide housing.
I acknowledge your comment about no legal effect of the draft district plan. Putting that to one side, nevertheless indicates the current thinking of the combined district council in relation to this area. And do you have an understanding of what the draft district plan proposes to zone this site and adjoining?
Future open zone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. My comment on that, just on the direction of travel and intent, is that the RPS change, which has change one to the RPS, which has quite clear direction on transport related greenhouse gas emissions, is notified, and so also has weight in this instance. It has more weight than the draft district plan.
Yes. Are you also suggesting that that proposed change to the RPS might influence the final form of the combined Wairarapa district plan in relation to this site?
Yeah. Policy.
Okay.
Matt, do you have any follow-up comments on that?
Not on that point, no, Mika, thank you.
Thank you for that. The final area of inquiry from me is you say in your second paragraph on page 2 that there's still significant infill potential within Masterton and other towns such as Carterton, and Mr. Heath has in fact linked to Carterton and Masterton together in his analysis. That could be enabled for meeting housing demand. In relation to this retirement village, the applicant indicated that they considered a number of sites, at least 5, and none of them sort of came up to grade in terms of what their site requirements were.
What were the site?
Site requirements are a site of around 8 to 10 hectares, and the impression that I got from Mr. Heath's evidence and from Mr. Smale, who's the representative from Welhom, was that there just weren't available sites from an infill perspective to deliver the sort of product that they're looking for. And that's the evidence in front of us. So that sort of indicates, and I'm not advocating the position here, I'm just inviting you to comment on what we've heard, that greenfield developments are really the way of achieving their goals in terms of site selection, that they don't really have a lot of choice in terms of current zone plan to through an infill proposal to achieve that deliverable of a site that's 8 to 10 hectares in area. Would you acknowledge some force in that argument?
I wish that if you're coming in with those criteria, greenfield development would appear to be the only option. I would, however, add that if you came in with different criteria, the answer would be different.
Yes.
And that is assuming a certain kind of housing typology, which we've been seeing a lot of pre-MPSUD,
Yes.
which we don't necessarily need to continue to see. We could be putting retirement villages or smaller clusters of elderly housing in towns where they have independent access to services and amenities at a smaller scale,
Sure.
with a range of housing typologies,
Yeah.
with a range of levels of independence.
If this was a plan change primarily solely to deliver a retirement village, and that's, I mean, the total area of the site is 14.7 hectares, I think, of which 9 hectares is allocated to the retirement village and 5.7 for residential. This was a plan change just for the 9.7 for the delivery of a retirement village. Given those site criteria, would your position be any different? I.e., there was no other residential component in terms of the answer you gave in terms of typologies and also in terms of traffic generation.
From my perspective, Matt, does it change anything from your perspective?
I'm thinking only really at the margin, because we still want to be encouraging active transport, even if it's a retirement village, and there'll still be traffic generated in terms of visitors, access to facilities. So it would only really tweak at the margin, but I think our position would be very, very similar.
Thank you, that's useful to know. Thank you, Ms. Solomon and Mr. Hick.
May I add one further comment, if I may, commissioners?
Sure, yes.
It's just really picking up, Commissioner Daesh, in terms of the LUC discussion earlier, and you mentioned the expert had gone out and looked at the soil, so it's essentially poor quality, and you did mention that the site and the soils had major drainage issues. Now, that does raise somewhat of a red flag for me in terms of hazards and building in hazardous areas. So I would ask you to consider the hazard component and the risk component as well, if we're now finding out that the site has major drainage issues, as you referred to earlier.
Yeah, just let me answer that, David. Yeah, certainly it's a bit unique. It's not because it's wet, because it's flood prone. It's because there's a very highly compacted 300mm clay on top, and then there's a gravity layer underneath. So it's really about being able to, the limitation is about plants being able to penetrate the hard clay layer, and there is no flooding risk when we've investigated this associated with that. It's not a wet floody area because it's within a major catchment. It's really just the type of the soil is not suitable for growing plants, and the evidence we had is you'd have to rip that soil, you'd have to introduce a lot of sand to make it suitable growing medium. So that was a limitation which they thought was fatal. So thanks for raising that.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah. Mika, you are at a serious disadvantage, and in a way, it's good that you're not presenting as an expert evidence, because we've had two full days of evidence and questioning and testing the matters that you've raised in your statements. So it's not a criticism, it is what it is, including things like detailed evidence about the connectivity, walking, cycling off this area through into Miro Street to the south, and then further south into Masterton. No. Ultimately, there are pathways and links through there. So we're not going to go through all that now, but I just wanted to say that giving broad policy information to us can only go so far when you haven't actually heard all of the evidence. So that's just the way that you've chosen to participate. The other thing I wanted to make sure that you've read the evidence of Mr. Heath. Have you done that? Okay. Again, we do have this counterfactual that we currently the the area has a shortfall of some 3,000 household units in terms of demand, and that's up to 2031, and then another 5,000 up to 2050. So over the next 30 years, there's an 8,000 shortage of homes, and that certainly does look at a current problem, which further housing like this would actually help start the yeah. So yes. Mm.
With all due respect. That's a valid point. But I think it points again to stepping back and reconsidering the approach to the NPSUD and how much more housing could be provided if that was at a higher level of density.
Yes, which yes.
You know, you could provide most of that housing on that site if it was at a higher level of density. So it's just reconsidering is going with the uplift plan as it is now and sitting within those limitations.
Yes.
If we step back, is that the most strategic approach? Is there a difference between pre-NPSUD and post-NPSUD that we can see? And
Yes.
that would be my closing comment, I guess.
It's probably not your closing comment, because I've got some other questions. So a couple of things. We asked for some further information on day one, and this was provided by Welhom yesterday. And I think, Daniel, that was circulated to all the parties. So this is this booklet we've got here. So it's further information on some legal points, and it's further information on a very recently designed Welhom project in Rangiora, which has the detailed design and a very dense, intense development on a smallish piece of land. So again, have you had a look at that in terms of the density and the efficiency? No, you haven't seen that. That's we've got evidence that is very similar to what's proposed here. So again, trying to catch up and give us opinion without having followed the course of the hearing is a bit awkward. To take you to is, if you haven't read this at all, and you haven't read the supplementary legal submissions from Mr. Milkinick. No, so that came out yesterday morning and was put through to everyone, Megan?
That document with the ringing road example was only delivered in the trade copies.
Yes. Yes.
That was attached to the
Same document. Yes. So that's really important to understand that when we're following through the hearings, there's further information provided to us. That does have, one of the things we wanted some more legal advice on was the status and whether we could consider the draft district plan and MUGs and plan change 1, and whether we had the ability to do that. And clearly we do under section 74(2)(b)(1). I think you've said to us that those documents don't have any status. We've got legal advice that they do, and then it just goes to weight of how much weight we give them. There's been a really interesting piece of case law I'll read out to you from the Environment Court about non-statutory sort of documents and information sources. So the Environment Court said on these sorts of matters, it's in a decision called Lanco, but of course the council or the Court on Appeal may have regard to it, so they're talking about a non-statutory document, simply as a piece of relevant and useful material, given the relevance of its subject matter and the research and effort that went into its preparation, it will be odd to simply ignore it. So the court's saying that these sorts of information come into the overall knowledge base when making a decision. So that's the other comment I'll make about that. Look, my last question is about your suggestion that this proposal waits and goes through the plan review process as a submission on the plan and a request. And presumably that would be via some particular submission from Welhom seeking this outcome in the plan. That's what would be an opportunity. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I
Don't know. So something in the future. Yes. Yes. On the basis that we don't, and is that on the basis we don't have, we might not have evidence to make a decision on the proposal, or is that just because you think it'd be a more strategic approach?
they need to have regard to will be different relating to subdivision development or future master plan, whatever relevant provisions will be different following August.
Yes.
than they are now.
Yes.
So this private plan change would be a plan change permitted in a plan just before it gets updated.
Okay. The decision making on the plan, would you agree, would have to look at the effects of a proposal in terms of the actual effects, transportation and other effects? That the overriding national direction would be exactly the same as we have today. We'd have to deal with the MPSUD if we were sitting on the plan review and the MPS HPL.
Yeah. What that looks like is story.
So there'd be some more. Yes. Okay. Have you been involved in the plan review process
Yes.
yourself? Yes. So what's that example?
What's an example of
Yes.
involved in?
Yes.
Oh, I coordinated our kind of feedback on the draft.
Okay. Yes. But you haven't been through a full plan process. I'm talking about a timing issue. So we're talking about an August 23 notification. Yes.
Yeah.
2-3 years. Okay, so you're really asking for us to give significant weight to the strategic elements you're talking about and put this whole project on the back burner for probably best case 2 years, probably 3. You think that's the sort of water we're talking about? Okay.
If a more coordinated approach can be taken in terms of planning the infrastructure that's required to provide for and assessing whether it is necessary and the typology that would be most suitable for it. I'm thinking particularly about the residential aspect of, if there was a residential scenario.
Why do you use that term more than minor effects, more than minor? How does that apply to a plan change decision-making process?
If the effects of the development, like by the time it gets to the resource consent stage, are likely to be more than on, for example, traffic and road infrastructure.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm interested in the use of those terms. Some of the other experts have used that as well. My understanding is that's a non-complying activity test. In terms of what we're looking at in the plan change, we're looking at what's appropriate and the effectiveness and efficiency of the plan change, looking at effects, but the more the minor test is not what we're charged to assess. We need to assess effects and we need to assess the appropriateness. And you'd agree that's our job. We've got evidence on all the effects. We need to assess those effects based on the evidence and then look at the policy regime and then make a decision. Yeah, so look, the reason I ask you about the time frame, I'm aware that plan change 1 for the council notified mid last year, August. It's been through submissions and further submissions. Hearings are starting sometime soon. Yeah.
Yeah, all being well, submissions will hearings will be beginning at the end of May,
End of
the
May.
RPS change, yeah.
Okay, yeah, which is obviously a key piece of policy that will again be perhaps more advanced in when the district plan's reviewed. So that goes to your point that there's more certainty and more information and more weight could be put to that at the moment. At the moment, what weight do you think we should give to plan change one
Well, so it's
as a proposed plan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Matt, did you want to make any closing comments about what's been discussed?
Just a couple of additional comments. One around waiting for the district plan side of things. It also allows the National Policy Statement for Fresh Water requirements in terms of TAs and integrated management to be built in. So that's another advantage there. In terms of the weight of RPS change, we're involved in a number of tier 1 hearings, which is one of the reasons why we can't be here for the full days for this, because we're managing multiple submissions and multiple hearings at the moment.
Yes.
And we have provided legal submissions to PCC lately on what have regard means, and that it does need to be genuine. I think the Office of View for PCC, this is a different case, was very much effectively lip service, but our legal submissions are of the view that it needs to be a genuine have regard to the changes within RPS change 1.
Yes, look, Matt, that's really interesting. I wonder, could you perhaps give us those, or give us a summary of that legal submission for us to consider in this case?
Because it should be public shortly, Mika, is that correct?
So this is the Porora City Council's intensification plan change we're talking about?
Yep, that's correct.
Yeah. And you would have been through the Wellington one the last couple of weeks. Yeah, look, it's a really busy time in this policy planning space. And please, Mika, don't take my comments sort of to heart. Like this really is great to have you here to hear your opinion. I know it would have been more valuable if you could have listened in, but it just hasn't been possible this time because of the competing interests. But certainly, just in terms of your speciality as a policy expert, I know whether you've given expert evidence before, but certainly there'll be a great next step for you, and I'm sure you'll do a great job through that sort of process as well. Thank you. Thank you very much, Matt, for sitting through.
Thank you, Commissioners. Appreciate it.
Okay. So I think we're going to move to you now, Liam, with the Waka Kotahi case. I'm thinking Daniel and Jacob, I wonder whether you might just vacate and let the Waka Kotahi team come up on this side.
That'll be helpful.
Yes.
Liaising with the council to see if one can be.
We have one.
No,
This the summary.
the summary.
The summary statement. His evidence, you do have to, it's a summary statement that he's going to talk to today.
Okay,
Yeah,
So-
sorry, we're not.
that's okay. So let's, so someone's printing it at the council. Okay, well, okay, well, we'll, it's better to do that because we write notes on the statement. So, we'll wait for that and we'll juggle things around until it arrives.
Yeah, I've got to do my legal submission.
Of course you do, yeah.
That's-
And then we'll have hopefully have a cup of tea and then we'll
Yeah.
wait for that then.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks, sir. So, like I said before, Liam Bullen for Waka Cottage. So I'm gonna go first with my legal submissions, read from Mr. Lincoln Lane yesterday.
yes,
Then the state will go, Mr. Connolly, and then Ms. Santana.
great, thank you.
So, I don't propose to read all of my legal submissions, some pass it into the full completeness. Unless you would like to, sir.
Look, I think be more thorough than less thorough.
Yeah.
Because I've only seen yours on my phone, skimmed it. So yes, as with the way Daniel went through his,
Yeah.
not every word, but
Yeah.
paraphrase where you can.
Oh, yeah, for example, I was proposing to skip the first two paragraphs.
Yeah, sure, of course, yeah, yep.
Evidence. Summary. Yes.
Sorry, I'm just making sure.
Yeah, she's up there, yeah. Thanks, sir.
Yeah, so Emma, we can see you online if you just like to introduce yourself, so that'd be really good. You might not be there, she's on a comfort stop, that's good, so we'll catch up with Emma. Okay, thank you, Liam, we'll get underway.
Thanks, sir. The site will be accessed. The site will be accessed through the Cashmere Oak subdivision. Access to that subdivision is directly from State Highway 2. The intersection is a T intersection which was approved by Waka Kotahi in 2009 and caveated on a low density development threshold. Commissioners, there was some discussion, I think yesterday, around the site and whether it was in the future development area in 2009. The St. Armand will be addressing that. However, I can confirm that is not the case. The site was not in the future development area in 2009, and as far as Waka Kotahi is aware, that never has been. But the St. Armand can go on with that.
Thank you.
The current speed limit of State Highway 2 at the intersection is 100 kilometres an hour. The safe and appropriate speed for this stretch of State Highway 2 has been assessed to be 80 kilometres an hour. The speed limit is expected to change to 80 kilometres an hour as part of the ISMP process, which Ms. Spade will address. See, she's online now. She might introduce herself.
Hello, Emma, how are you?
Good morning. I'm
Yeah,
very well,
welcome.
thank you.
Welcome to our hearing.
Thank you. I've been listening in all morning, so.
Yeah, great, thank you.
The 1.5, there is also a recreational trail network on the eastern side of State Highway 2, opposite the site, and a footpath from the intersection on the western side, so the same side as the site, down into Masterton. Both paths are well used. Heat maps, Strava heat maps show that users currently cross State Highway 2 in the 100 km/h area to access the recreational trail network on the other side, and there is currently no pedestrian crossing infrastructure in place.
You talk about heat maps, is that just following people body heat or something, is it? I'm not,
That's
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so, yes, it is.
Yes.
We were advised by a multi-modal team on maps, so they looked it up for us on McKinnon, from Kotahi. And he could, have an accountant who can log in and store out the information that captures probably about 20% of people out there being active, so it's not capturing the full population, it's a portion of the population. And you can draw out information from them, see where people are walking, cycling, and what they're up to, and you can connect with it's a social connection as well. But for the purposes of this, it shows us where people are.
Ben's got,
GPS on your phone.
okay,
The heat relates to the volume, so the blue being the small volume.
Okay. That's when my wife used to track our teenage daughters by phone. Is that a similar sort of technology?
Yeah. Along with knowledge, I'm with you on that.
Yeah. Okay, are those heat maps of, like, I can't recall seeing them in the evidence, but
There are some evidence.
They're on the summary
And then
evidence.
my summary evidence as well.
They might be.
They're in your evidence in chief. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, sir. 1.7, the plan change was publicly notified and Waka Kotahi lodged a submission and further submission in opposition, raising concerns about the plan changes and implications for the safe and efficient functioning of the state highway network. And so I thought it useful to go over Waka Kotahi's case this month, which is also set out in the submissions. Firstly, the plan change will essentially enable creation of a massive cul-de-sac, which is entirely reliant on the intersection to access State Highway 2. Cashmere Oaks intersection cannot safely accommodate the increased number of vehicle, pedestrian and cyclist movements, which the plan change will enable. Further to that, just because there are no crashes recorded at the intersection currently, does not mean that it will continue to operate safely when accommodating transport movements arising from the completed Cashmere Oaks subdivision together with the plan change for neighbourhood development. Current vehicle movements now are less than 20% of those which would be generated by full development from Cashmere Oaks and plan change sites. And so I mentioned some numbers further down my submission.
Okay, yeah.
Waikota's case is that a reduced speed limit of 80 kilometres an hour will not mitigate the adverse safety effects caused by the plan change development. Indeed, even if the speed limit was to reduce to 50 kilometres an hour, deaths and serious injuries are still predicted to increase as a result of the development enabled by the plan change. While not being the only solution, a roundabout combined with a speed limit of 50 kilometres an hour and changes to urbanise the state highway corridor would reverse the predictable increase in deaths and serious injuries. But Waka Kotahi and Marsden District Council cannot fund this in the request or as refused. Commissioners, the plan change provisions are inadequate and will not provide a reasonable future process to reduce traffic safety risk to an acceptable level at the resource consent stage. And there's a slight typo here. I might jump to controlled. Controlled activity status would mean that consent could not be refused. This means Waka Kotahi's ITA recommendation can be essentially ignored by a future resource consent applicant. And there would be the option of decline would not be an option, it's not a consequence of that.
Okay, I got a bit lost here. So, so would you?
Explain.
Yeah, let's do that. So let's go slowly. So we should start after the word resource consent stage. What should it now read? This.
Well, perhaps first I should say, noting the requester's proposed change to include provision for Waka Kotahi involvement in the ITA. Refers to the change which was circulated, I think, yesterday.
Okay, I think I understand what you're getting at. Yes,
Yeah.
That's good. So carry on.
Jumping to D. I'll say there is currently no ability or hook to notify Waka Kotahi as an affected party. Also, cumulative effects can be difficult to manage if consents are sought in an ad hoc and piecemeal way. So in response to the requester's submission that Waka Kotahi's case is grounded on the road to zero strategy and that this is not a resource management approach, Waka Kotahi submits. While Waka Kotahi's opposition to this plan change is consistent with its road to zero strategy, the opposition is primarily based on modelled adverse safety effects and the characteristics of this site. So the plan change will create a large cul-de-sac with one road in and out. It is incorrect to compare this plan change proposal with more general intensification for urbanisation initiatives. Vehicles turning right towards Masterton will have to cross 2 lanes of traffic. Well, at speeds of up to 100 kilometres an hour. This right turn will be the predominant traffic movement. And so I refer to the Arvida decision here, or the Arvida site, and I do so a couple of times throughout these legal submissions. I have a copy of the decision.
We've had no information or evidence. The first time we knew about it was when we drove up there on Tuesday evening. So anything you can give us, I was going to ask you some questions about what happened with the Vita. It's pretty in your face now that it's being built.
Yeah.
Yes. So a copy of the decision would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so I addressed that a couple of times and it's we'll address it too if you have questions. Both involved on that.
Okay. Great, thank you.
So comparing this situation to the Arvida site, when the predominant, well, the vehicles traveling to Arvida turn into a right turn bay, and in doing so, they only need to cross through 1 lane of traffic.
Because they're turning right rather than coming out. Okay, yes.
So 1 lane.
Yes.
This right turn movement is important because T-bone side impact crashes, which occur during right turning movements, are more likely to result in deaths and serious injuries. And the Cashmere Oaks and Plain Change sites have no shops, schools, or other conveniences. They are limited. There are limited and unsafe pedestrian and cyclist facilities, keeping the site to Masterton for the recreation trails. Site lacks both integration and connectivity.
I see there was another Dash involved in that Avida case.
That's it.
Yep.
Jumping to 1.9, jumping this paragraph. If I can shorten our case even further, overall, what the considers traffic safety effects of the plan change, being a more than minus 56 to 67% increase in death, serious injury crashes, need to be mitigated to an acceptable level. And if I can also add, and that cannot be done for the reasons consent process.
But the mitigation can't be mitigated through it can't be mitigated through resource consent conditions. Is that what you're saying?
Is that or sorry, as the plan change conditions.
Okay, but there would be separate analysis in the resource consent stage with separate conditioning possible.
Yes.
So he's saying that, I'm not sure, he's saying that recognising the effect that you identified, that effect could not be mitigated through a resource consent decision.
Not one with these characteristics. So not as a part of the control activity where there's no multiple one.
Okay, I think you're so you've qualified that.
Yeah.
If it was a discretionary, there were submissions, you could put conditions, including a roundabout that could be mitigated.
Yeah.
Yes, so that's a process point, isn't it?
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I address the issues with it.
Sure.
Later on. Moving on to section 2, Wakaputa's primary concern with the plan change is adverse traffic safety effects. Again, I say the plan change will essentially enable the creation of a massive cul-de-sac which only relies on the intersection. That point 2. I propose to skip 2.2 through to 2.5, unless you'd like me to cover it, but there doesn't seem to be much dispute about the existing environment. I only might cover that 70 units, I understand 70 units currently built in the Cashmere Oak subdivision. A further 91 are consented and planned to be built, and together those 161, we say, and I'm not aware that the request disputes this, form the existing environment.
Okay, look, I'll ask you a question about this, and it signals some evidential matters. The linkage between your 1.1A3, middle of page 2, Liam, can you see that? And yeah, so that paragraph there.
Yep.
And your 2.1, you use the term massive cul-de-sac.
Yep.
I asked the Welhom's traffic engineers to look at the current northern Masterton area that services a big area of land that comes into, I think it's Third Street, which comes to a T intersection. So if you know where
I do know where Third Street is.
yes,
But I don't know what's in Third Street.
yes. So there's a lot of traffic coming out of there at 50 Ks on a 50K environment with no roundabout. So there must be some difference here. So what you're saying is that even at 50, and with no roundabout, you've still got those major concerns. So I'm just thinking, Catherine's got her hand up, but what's the answer there? Yes, it's not coming all out onto that point. Okay. Yes.
Because they are even fabric and they're many roles. It's plenty of illicit.
Yes.
And yeah, so.
So that's
that you don't need plenty of illicit.
that's the difference. Okay. Thank you.
I was only prepared that it's a left turn move, get in past Third Street.
Same as the Avida situation. Okay.
Okay, at 2.6, that's it.
Yes.
One of the Chinese evidence is that the receiving road environment, including the intersection, is not designed or developed to safely cater for the traffic likely to be generated by development that the plan change will enable. This will cause adverse traffic safety effects for vehicles using the intersection and active transport users crossing over the state highway. In particular, there will likely be an increase in vehicle trip generation of between 158% and 124%. And those numbers may look funny, but they're around that way because that's scenario 1 being 158 for residential. Scenario 2.
Yep.
Compared to the trips predicted by the consented Cashmere Oaks subdivision being fully developed. This is an increase of between 493% and 421% on the current vehicle movements. By that, I mean the vehicle movements now at between 70 units that are compared to full development of site and Cashmere Oaks. The increased number of turning movements and vulnerable road users that would use the intersection with increased development is likely to result in crashes resulting in deaths and serious injuries. This is that is an adverse effect with high consequences. The modelling predicts that there will be one death and serious injury crash every 17 to 19 years. If the development enabled by the plan change goes ahead. Compared to every 29 years, one dead site crash every 29 years for the existing environment. This represents a more than minor difference at 67% increase. The predominant movement out of the intersection will be a right-hand turn, crossing over 2 lanes of traffic. Is the manoeuvre that carries the highest roadside risk. Again, this can be contrasted with the right turn bay, which accesses the Avida village on State Highway 2, which only has to cross one major. Any pedestrian or cyclist crossing State Highway 2 at the intersection will be at risk of getting a serious injury.
Ben, could you just give me that number again? This one DSI every 17 to 19 compared to one every 29 years
In the existing environment.
That's with consented Cashmere Oaks with And again, I'll ask you about you using the term more than minor. Is that a legal test for us, or is that something that is in the traffic, the way traffic engineers look at things, or a policy document?
The more than minor was from Mr. Landon Lane's evidence.
Yes.
That's not intended to be a legal test. I noted your comment earlier about the non-compliant test. I
Yes,
certainly don't intend to equate it with that.
yes,
I was more, that was more, it more it quantifies the effects.
yes,
And you try to use an RMA approach.
yes. So he's used it as a term of art to describe a descriptive continuum. So it's either minor, less than minor, more than minor, medium on some sort of continuum. Is that the way? We don't have him to answer the question, so.
Yeah.
But the main thing is you're not looking at it in a legal more than minor test.
No.
Okay,
Not like
But-
in the team do.
okay. No, I think that's enough.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
We are at 2.7.
Mm.
And we'll just note that earlier I mentioned a 56 to 67% increase in DSI crashes. I note that in Ms. Muelson's summary statement from yesterday, it referred to two sets of numbers, one with a 2% growth rate, I understand, and one, I can't remember the term, but it made adjustments for the downward.
Yes,
crash
table
rate.
one and table two.
Table one, table two. Sure, thank you. Even table two was still a 60%, 66% increase in DSI crashes. My calculations.
I think your argument was that you're at a very low base and you're still at a low base comparatively. So that was what she was trying to get across to us, I think. You'd agree with that?
I agree that's what she's trying to get across.
Yes.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that statement, as I'll cover later.
Okay.
So that informed my next paragraph, which says that I understand that Waikato and the requesters traffic experts generally agree on the above traffic safety steps. Including those Nielsen's updated numbers, they disagree on the appropriate mitigation for those effects. So I'll move to 3.1.
Mm.
The requester suggests that Waikato concerns are driven by its road to zero strategy and has no resource management basis. Waikato disagrees. Waikato has used an RMA approach in concluding that the transport safety effects are unacceptable and that there needs to be a fundamental review of the intersection. Insert the numbers I quoted in the next paragraph from Ms. Muelson's summary evidence and that from table 1. As outlined, Waikato witnesses have assessed the traffic safety effects and consider them to be more than minor. The requester submits a DSI of 1.25. The 1.25G serious injury crashes does not require fundamental intersection redesign, nor does it provide a basis for applying its plan change. And so I think the requester submissions refer to 1.1. I've used 1.25 to be Ms. Muelson's updated numbers, but the same method of applying from Waikato. With respect, that is not an RMA approach. Using data Ms. Muelson agrees with, the figure of 1.25 should not be viewed on its own, but rather as a 69% increase on the existing environment number of 0.74 zero sections. Further, the evidence of Mr. Landon Lane is that by 2063, the expected DSI outcome will be 56 to 67% higher than the existing environment as a result of the plan change. Mr. Landon Lane did this clear more defined. Mr. Connolly considers the mitigation measures outlined by Ms. Muelson do not reduce risk to anywhere near an acceptable level, and the primary reason for that then Mr. Connolly's evidence is that they do not address the speed of State Highway 2 users. Commissioners, instead, to mitigate the more than minor increase in DSI crashes, Mr. Connolly considers a fundamental review of the intersection is needed. While Mr. Connolly suggests a roundabout may not be the only solution, modelling undertaken by Mr. Landon Lane predicts that installing a roundabout will save one DSI by 2053 or 2057. The modelling results also indicate that installing a roundabout will lower DSI crashes compared to the current existing environment, even with no plan change. And so if I can refer back to the earlier numbers, so it was one DSI crash every 29 years with no mitigation in the current existing environment, and with a roundabout that's about one every 42 years. That is my recollection. That's helpful. So a roundabout is an improvement on the current existing environments.
Yes, just teasing that out a bit further. You would have heard me I think on day one. I was interested in the dialogue around who pays for a new roundabout and whether that would, or we don't have the discussions. You had discussions you didn't get agreement with. But was the expectation from Waka Kotahi that Welhom would pay for 100% of any new roundabout on the state highway? Was that the basis of the discussion?
Yeah, we did it. I understand that's the case.
Probably, yeah, I think it's a client matter. So, Emma, can you help us with that one?
Yes. Our expectation is when developments take place that the developer, whether it's a public entity or a private entity, would pay to mitigate the effect on the transport network.
Okay, so that wasn't quite my answer. Was a discussion that that Welhom would foot the bill for the whole roundabout construction cost?
I wasn't a party to the discussions, but that's my advice is that the discussions were that Welhom should be putting a roundabout in as part of its development.
Okay, because where I'm going with here is that if you look at the difference in DSI between before and after, we've got a 0.5 DSI difference in terms of I'm looking at the numbers and tell me if I'm wrong, 1.25 to 0.74.
And Ms. Mills, yeah.
Yes, Ms. Mills' numbers.
Yeah.
And the prediction is that with the roundabout, it would save one DSI in place. So there's looks like half the effects would be responsibility for the proposer and half the effects they'd be doing for the greater good. Is that how you see it?
You can see my maths there, but I think the one DSI was 40 years, whereas the numbers 1.25 was 20 years. But
look, I think we do need someone to give us some sort of rational agreement on this.
Yeah.
It is a traffic engineering matter, and perhaps we need to actually have a very clear statement about this, because I am really interested in. I've been around for a long time, and I've been involved in lots of cases where contributions are needed for sort of wider improvements, but never at 100% to create benefits for the state highway network.
Yeah.
Yes. 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 Yes.
At least a requirement to upgrade the intersection.
Mm.
What the traffic safety engineers did advise to Somerset that whilst a roundabout would mitigate the traffic safety effects of the whole development, It was not to mitigate all of the effects in the road transport corridor between the intersection and back to the 50k threshold. That's that 150 metres that has been talked about previously in the room. What our safety engineers advised was the roundabout would be the first step. After that, there would have to be other things like curb and channel and all of these other things that urbanise the corridor. But the roundabout would be sufficient to enable the speed reduction because it would be a step change in the road environment, allow speed reduction to come in, create an appropriate threshold that the speed managers said they could probably get on board with. And so the roundabout create that environment, but it would not be the be all and end all. There would have to be more investment from the public purse to fix up the rest of the safety issues that would fall
in the 150 area.
in that stretch between the 50 and
Yes.
the intersection.
Yes.
So potentially in advance of the roundabout slightly as well.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, on the other side.
Yes.
Yeah. So there would be other attendant things that our safety engineers said they would have to go away and find money for somehow or another.
Yes.
The roundabout would just be the starting point.
Yes. But we heard yesterday that there's the developer will be up for 2% financial contributions that would come into the council to deal with infrastructure effects. So
That's not the same.
okay.
Yeah.
So are you suggesting that councils never contribute to upgrades to state highway infrastructure?
Through business case, then they can do.
Yes.
There is no business case there.
Yes.
yet.
Okay.
And Emma will talk about that in the complementary and business case and how councils contribute.
Okay, I'm just trying to get the numbers. I'm just trying to get the fair proportionality here. I'm not forming a view. I'm just seeking evidence and advice. So, but I think what my numbers are right, aren't they? That on the PSI numbers, we've got a 0.5 increase, and then the saving of 1 coming back the other way. But that might be over different time periods.
I'd have to look at crash stats because the that's been blamed at those.
Yes.
The other way of looking at it is the increase in the number of housing units or the increase in traffic volume as well might be actually
Yes.
increase, which is essentially what you're after.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Well, I think it'd be good to actually agree what needs to be come to us on those numbers in terms of cause and effect, and what would be a fair and reasonable proportional contribution as an alternative to saying you'd have to do it 100% yourself. Yes.
My general impression is that the experts agree on the level of effects and
Yes.
the portion, as you say, but they use different
Time frames, yes, which was getting so there was a 5-year, there's a 20-year, then a 40-year, and so I think that's the information that we'd like to have in front of us.
Do you think it would be a joint witness statement or?
Yes, similar to how the civil engineers did those, and my experience as engineers are really great at getting their heads together and working those facts out, because it is a factual position based on the modelling, and everyone's using the same models with other things. Okay, well, can we just record that as something as an action to come through to us on a joint witness statement? Perhaps the best thing to do would be over the break, just talk together, agree a task between the 5 experts, I suppose, and then report that back to us maybe at lunchtime, so we can actually just see what the task is and then get that underway.
Is that a matter between Ms Mewson and Mr Langdon Lane, or is it all 5?
But we
Yeah, including Harriet, I think.
Okay. And it's purely factual rather than evaluative.
vehicle generation rates for the future development.
Yes.
We need to agree that. Vehicle growth rates on the state highway.
Yes.
Need to be agreed, but these are all numbers
Yes.
that can be agreed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Vehicle reductions if the difference between table 1 and table 2, what the appropriate reduction is.
Yes. And,
regardless of what that might show.
and the DSI rates over consistent timeframes.
Yes, for apples and apples.
Yeah, and I'm wondering whether we also look at the gap analysis work that Mr. Georgian's done, because that seems to be running through a certain model, CIDRA model. So, you know, an agreed statement of numbers, I suppose, that an engineer would use.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's work on that, because that's going to be very helpful. Saves us trying and interpret numbers around different timeframes. Thank you. Look, I noticed it's 11:11. You're on a roll here. Should we get to the?
It's my longest section, I think, but I can go to another heading. 3.16 would be a good.
Okay, stop there. Yeah, so can continue on until there, Liam. Thanks.
I think I was at what, 3.7?
Hmm.
The modelling results also indicate that installing a roundabout will at that point will lower DSI crashes compared to the current existing environment. The request order expresses concerns that quote, Somerset is not required to make improvements to road safety as part of the plan change. In response, following an RMA approach, the request order is simply required to adequately mitigate the effects of its plan change. In the case of a roundabout, the reality is that it is not possible to build a roundabout that only lowers DSI crashes such that the plan change is having a negligible effect. To use an example, if using Mr. Lane's numbers, one DSI crash every 17 to 19 years, I'm saying it would not be possible to lower this back to say one every 29 years in the existing environment. It's particularly all or nothing approach that but I think the evidence is that it always goes further. Say to the 42 years. Spot. Another approach roundabout, no roundabout. A fundamental review of the intersection as suggested by Mr. Connolly could address these issues and consider what is required to mitigate risk to an acceptable level. Now, cover the request for mitigation approach. There is disagreement between the experts on the appropriate form of mitigation. The request of safety expert, Ms. Nielsen, considers a safety management approach as the most appropriate form of mitigation, and she outlines various examples of these measures and evidence. And I know Mr. Nathan Lane responded to this yesterday, and both orally. Ms. Nielsen's conclusion on mitigation, i.e. the measures that she recommends, is based on her view that the level of risk for the intersection does not reach the level where safety transformation would apply. Ms. Nielsen's assessment of risk is based on crash history and past performance of the intersection at a time when development was less than 70 units. Mr. Connolly considers this as an entirely reactive approach to road safety. In recommending her mitigation measures, Ms. Nielsen uses the following approach. She assesses the risk of the intersection based on crash history and current traffic volume. Based on risk, that she suggests a safety management approach would be the appropriate response, rather than safety information. Commissioners, Michael Portahi submits that Ms. Nielsen's approach is flawed from an RMA perspective, as it does not properly consider the existing environment which would be affected, and it also does not consider the level of effects of development enabled by the plan change. Her approach considers safety effects being past crash history based on physical development now and in the past, and uses actual crash data rather than the proper approach of also considering the effects of consented development and the plan change development. Crash history used by Ms. Nielsen was for a period of time where there were less than 70 lots in Cashmere Oaks compared to the 161% lots which form the legal existing environment. The requestor also considers that Ms. Nielsen's approach of only assessing past crash history indicates that the current infrastructure can continue to operate within acceptable levels as the site is developed. This approach can be contrasted to the modelling undertaken by Mr. Landon Lane, which supports the view of Mr. Connolly, considering a fundamental review of the intersection needs to be undertaken. In contrast, in the Nielsen's approach, Mr. Landon Lane assesses the effects of the plan change development on DSIs. He assesses the effects against the correct existing environment of 161 lots in the catchment area subdivision. In addition, Mr. Connolly considers Ms. Nielsen's approach. Firstly, accepts that some death and serious injuries could occur and is acceptable, which does not address the potentially significant adverse safety effects, significant adverse effects. It uses a reactive tool which aims to address existing DSIs rather than future DSIs, justify not mitigating the safety risk that will be created by the plan change. It uses an inappropriate tool to assess whether the intersection needs to be upgraded to cater for the development enabled by the plan change. In response to the question you had from Mr. Lewandowski yesterday, I note that Mr. Allen will also address this issue in relation to which set of traffic safety evidence should be deferred. My legal submission is that the commissioners should prefer Waka Kotahi's traffic and safety evidence on whether the proposed mitigation is appropriate. That's because the requestor's safety assessment is flawed from an RMA perspective and does not apply the existing environment correctly for the reasons set out above.
I've got a very brief question before we break. I just wonder, in terms of 316, whether the term proposed mitigation is the appropriate one and whether it should be proposed planning framework or consenting framework to address potential mitigation is appropriate. Would you accept that change? Yes,
I would might add on to reduce the risk to an acceptable level, but I agree. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Liam. We'll break now until 11:30 and just get underway then. Just have a cup of tea. Thank you very much.